USA Today's too early rankings for the 2026 college football season are out. We're reacting to them today. We're also reacting to Dabo Swinney blowing the whistle loudly on Pete Golding, the Ole Miss coach. Dabo Swinney says he has turned in Pete Golding for tampering. Welcome in to this edition of SEC Football Unfiltered, our podcast from the USA Today Network. I'm Blake Topmeyer alongside John Adams. John, we will get to Dabo making some noise about tampering in the second half of the podcast. But first off, we're seeing all these too early rankings for the 2026 season. In your mind, is it too early to have rankings for the 2026 season? I mean, we've got the transfer portal movement kind of already done now. To me, it's like, all right, let's go. It's on to 2026 season.
Yeah, that's just what you do in our business. I usually do I pick my SEC standings right after the national championship game, but I waited a week this year because all the transfer activity.
Mm-hmm.
You just can't be sure of the rosters. I'm pretty sure now, so that makes it harder than ever to. And it's not just picking in late January; it's predicting in August because so much turnover. You know, people adding 20, 30, 40 players via the portal. You just can't go by starters returning and past record anymore. I go by who's got the most NIL money, I think, even though there's not a web page for that. But that's one of the things I go by, and how much damage you can do in the portal.
Yeah. All right. Well, we will unpack these too early rankings from USA Today. They were not compiled by John and I. John, as he mentioned, will have his own rankings as far as predicting the SEC standings. But these rankings were compiled by a couple of our colleagues, Paul Meyerberg and Eric Smith, over at USA Today. We think the world of both of them. We may not agree, however, with all of their too early rankings, and we will not be afraid to say the ones that we may disagree with. So here's what I'm going to do, John. I'm going to give you the top 5 in the rankings, and then I will list off other SEC teams that are ranking. So I don't want to go through everybody, but I'll give you the top 5 and then others from the SEC. So 1 through 5, Texas is number 1 in these too early rankings, followed by Ohio State, Georgia, Indiana, the defending champs, and then Notre Dame rounding out the top 5. So sort of some familiar names there that we typically see in preseason rankings, plus Indiana at number 4. And now I'm going to give you the other SEC teams that are in these rankings. Oklahoma at number 6, Texas A&M at number 8, number 11 is Alabama, number 15 is LSU after Lane Kiffin's transfer portal raid, Ole Miss, number 20, and the last SEC team in these quote-unquote too early top 25 rankings from USA Today is Tennessee at number 24. So if you're counting, that is 8 SEC teams in total in this top 25. Your thoughts, just sort of 10,000 foot with Texas at number 1 and where sort of the SEC falls in these rankings.
Well, I kind of agree with Texas being number 1. I think in the second half of the season, Arch Manning became what people thought he might be when the season kicked off, rushing for 155 yards against Michigan. And Steve Sarkisian has surrounded him with so many offensive weapons, 2 all-conference running backs, wide receiver Cam Coleman, and he had 2 good receivers coming back. Even though he lost one to Oklahoma. So I look at that as a really high-powered offense, and Steve Sarkisian knows offense, and he can call plays. So I don't have a problem with that. I would concur on that. And I think the schedule it's tough, but it's manageable. It's not overwhelming.
Okay. All right. So we're doubling down on the Texas hype, which we kind of talked about a couple weeks ago, that we're not fading Texas this season just because they didn't live up to the hype last season. Maybe shame on us, or not us in particular, but the media at large for putting Texas at number one this past year. But that doesn't necessarily mean there'll be a bust this upcoming year. It may only mean that we were a year too soon on some of this hype. And to your point, Texas has loaded up in the portal. I'm struck by the fact that this is the largest transfer class Steve Sarkisian has ever had. Doesn't mean that he's given up on high school recruiting, but Sarkisian has hit the portal with more commitment than he has in past cycles. And we're seeing that from a couple of schools that are traditional recruiting powers. Ohio State, outside the SEC, is another one, John, that normally makes its living through sign and develop of high school recruits and then supplements a few transfers. Well, we're seeing it with Texas. We're also seeing it with Ohio State. They're going much more heavy in the portal this year, not to the extent that an LSU is with Lane Kiffin or that Ole Miss is, but programs like Texas and Ohio State are going heavier in the portal than they have in past seasons to further supplement what they're doing in high school recruiting. And I have to think, John, don't you think some of that is the Indiana influence? Like seeing what Indiana did with this veteran roster, this transfer-laden roster with Kurt Cignetti, I have to think coaches like Steve Sarkisian and Ryan Day are thinking, we can still sign top 5 high school classes, but we might need to go a little bit heavier in the portal than what we've done the last few years.
Yes, and I believe both of those programs they aspire to win national championships. That's the only thing that will satisfy their fan bases too. They're not in it to make the playoffs. So they need to win it all. And sure, I think what you see those teams doing, and I think you'll see any schools that have the financial wherewithal to afford this, is going to start doing the same thing more and more, where they don't look at let's fill needs and maybe get a few elite players. Let's look at our depth chart and see, well, is that guy better than what we have? If so, let's get him.
You know who's the exception to this still, John, is Kirby Smart. Kirby is almost standing alone of doing it largely through the old model. Kirby signed the largest class of high school recruits of any SEC coach in this cycle. He had the biggest recruiting class in the SEC, pretty highly ranked recruiting class as well. But as the companion to that, he has the smallest transfer class in the SEC. Now, it's bigger than some of the transfer classes that Georgia has had. Famously, in 2022, Kirby Smart bragged, kind of puffed out his chest about signing no transfers ahead of that 2022 season. It worked fine. Georgia repeated as national champions in 2022, despite bringing in no transfers before that season. Again, that was a point of great pride for Kirby Smart. Well, now Kirby's bringing in about 9 or 10 transfers a year. Even he has evolved some, but still, a 9-man transfer class, that's pretty small potatoes in this current landscape. And so, I don't want to cast stones at Kirby because, hey, they're the 2-time defending SEC champions. So, if you're going to say do it the old way, he's doing it better than a lot of people probably would. But I also am struck by the fact, John, that not since that 2022 national championship team has Kirby won a playoff game. They maybe could have won a playoff game in 2023, but lost to Alabama in the SEC championship, didn't make the playoff in that final year of the 4-team field. And then the past 2 seasons did not win a playoff game. Of course, 2 years ago, some extenuating circumstances, losing Carson Beck right before the playoff to injury. But I am still struck by that, John, that Kirby, by and large, is doing it more of the old way. And maybe that can still work. Maybe this coming season we'll see sort of a throwback type national champion. But if that is going to be the case, then Kirby's recruiting class from 2024, that was number 1 in the country, he signed 30 players that year. These are guys that are going to be third-year players this upcoming season. Nate Frazier, the star running back, was one of the Bollywood players in that class. Those guys, particularly guys on defense now that are third-year players, they have to become stars for Kirby Smart to win another national championship because he's not getting the abundance of transfers that we're seeing at other places.
I think the last 2 years of Georgia football is a tribute to Kirby Smart's coaching, because I don't think it had, you mentioned it hadn't won a playoff game. I don't think it had the talent of some other teams in that top tier. However, I think long term, this is a losing enterprise for him. I think he's got to go big in the portal. There's no way around it. I don't care how good a coach he is, and he's a terrific coach, great on game day, and not many of those guys are. But I just think when you look at what the competition's doing, you can't keep up. It makes me wonder, does Georgia have the necessary NIL funds to compete at the highest level in the portal too? This may not be solely Kirby Smart's philosophy. It might be Kirby Smart realizing, well, this is how much we have. I can't go get that transfer quarterback and pay him $4 or $5 million. I'll have to make do with less. So I better really get good guys at a high school level, keep them, and develop them. But I
So
just think.
What do you think then about Georgia being number 3 in these two early rankings for 2026? You think overrated, underrated, about right? How do you feel about Georgia checking in there at number 3?
I think it's too high, but I think I look at Georgia's schedule. It's a very manageable schedule. This is not compared to the other championship contenders. It's not as high. And so to me, it's how do you formulate and what's your philosophy on a preseason top 25? Are you picking how you think the final rankings will be, or are you picking the best teams? In Georgia's case, I don't think it's number 3 either way. I don't see Georgia finishing third nationally. I think Georgia will be at the bottom of the top 10, but not in the top 3. I have it third in the SEC,
behind Texas and
LSU.
You're getting sucked back in by LSU, aren't you?
Well,
John?
no, I'm just not, because of my just dreadful number 1 prediction for LSU last year. I will not let that impact how I evaluate it this year. Nobody did as much in the portal as Lane Kiffin. No news there. But with LSU's money and with his passion for the portal, I think he's assembled a powerhouse roster. I think it's so I have LSU second in the SEC.
As I look at the top end of these USA Today rankings, one thing I'm struck by, and I don't know if this was part of the methodology or not necessarily, but so many familiar faces at quarterback for these top teams. Let's just take it from the top. Texas brings Arch Manning back. Ohio State at number 2, they bring back Julian Sayin as well as star receiver Jeremiah Smith. Georgia at number 3, they're bringing back Gunnar Stockton. Indiana, they're having a quarterback change, but they're bringing in one of the best transfer quarterbacks in the country in Josh Hoover, and they're ranked number 4. Notre Dame at number 5, they bring back their starting quarterback, C.J. Carr, who by the end of the season was showing great promise as a future star and, well, a current star at Notre Dame. You move on to number 6, Oklahoma. They're bringing back their quarterback, John Mateer. Texas Tech, they're not bringing back a quarterback, but much like Indiana, they're bringing in one of the most proven transfers at quarterback in Brendan Sorsby from Cincinnati. And then at number 8, Texas A&M, they're bringing back their quarterback in Marcel Reed. And again, I don't dispute that methodology if that did factor in. I mean, hey, if you got a quarterback, you have a chance. That's what we say on this podcast. That's what everybody says because it's true. If you have a quarterback, you have a chance. And I am struck by the top 8 teams in these rankings. 6 of them returned their starting quarterbacks, and the other 2 brought in 2 of the most proven transfer quarterbacks on the market. So I think there are more foolish ways, I guess, to come up with a too early top 25 than to put a lot of influence on quarterbacks. I think that's a pretty good starting point. How about you?
Yeah, I agree, Blake. And I look at 3 things now. If you want to win a championship or if you want to make the playoffs, 3 things. NIL support, you got to have it. You got to have the money. Uh, have a plan and a real aggressive approach to the transfer portal, because you got to get the best roster you can afford, and then you got to have a proven quarterback. Those three things to me stand out. If you got all those going for you, I think you can compete for a championship.
John, as you look at the 8 SEC teams in this top 25, do one or two stand out to you as maybe being the most overrated? Maybe you'd have them in your top 25, but you think they're too high at where they are.
I think Georgia's too high. I think Alabama
At number
is too
11,
at
yeah, too
number
high at
11
11.
is way
Mhm.
too high, and I think Ole Miss is probably too high.
Ole Miss is so tough because there's the ongoing issue with Trinidad Chambliss, and is he
Oh
going to
yeah,
get
yeah,
is he going to get granted that extra? If we knew Chambliss was getting the extra year and was going to be their quarterback, then I might feel better about them at where they're at, and I might even say, hey, they're a little bit underrated. With Kewan Lacey coming back, if Chambliss is getting that extra year, then maybe that's fine. If he's not getting, it's kind of hard to rank them really at this point, not knowing what the deal is
yeah,
with Chambliss.
yeah. I definitely would have Ole Miss higher if he were returning. The others I look at, I think Oklahoma is a little high. I had it fifth in the SEC. Tennessee might be a little high too. I don't know that it's a. I think he'll be right on the cusp. That's probably about right, a 24 ranking. I don't know who the quarterback will be. Probably George McIntyre, redshirt freshman, um, against a tougher schedule. So I think 8-4 is probably the ceiling for Tennessee. But 8-4 could get you in the top 25. You win a bowl game.
Mm-hmm. I wonder about Texas A&M, John, because they were one of the big stories in college football this year. Went undefeated so deep into the season, but then sort of fizzled at the end. They lost to Texas in the regular season finale. They lost to Miami at home in a playoff game, and so when it was all said and done, I think it was a pretty celebrated year for the Aggies. I mean, they won 11 games, they went 11-2, but they finished with back-to-back losses. And you look at what they achieved, and really they were hanging their hat on the road win against Notre Dame, which was a huge result. I mean, it kept Notre Dame out of the playoff. It really cemented Texas A&M getting a home playoff game. They didn't win it, but they at least made the playoff, which was big for that program. But as I said, as you go back and look at what they achieved, um, it was a little bit of a weak 11-2. Really just the one signature victory against Notre Dame, and then I look at what they face next year. They have Arizona State in the non-conference of the schedule, but really the SEC play is where it's tough. Their SEC schedule includes at LSU, at Alabama, home game against Tennessee, at Oklahoma, and then home game against Texas. And I just wonder if there's going to be a backslide for Texas A&M this year. Like I said, in particularly when I view this past season through the lens of hindsight and say, hey, round of applause for going 11-2, but other than Notre Dame, who'd you really beat en route to 11-2?
Well, I've got A&M fourth in the SEC. So
Okay, so you're still buying in.
yeah, again, NIL, we know A&M has the money. The portal, it's revamped its offensive line and added a receiver in Isaiah Horton. Um, then Marcel Reed, I think, is a good quarterback. Marcel Reed improved from 24 to 25, and he needs to improve some more. He needs to be more consistent. But if he can do that, I think that A&M offense could be okay. And A&M added a kicker. That's significant because A&M's kicking was pretty erratic last year. And even though it faltered there at the end, I thought Texas was really a good team at the end of the season. In the Miami game, I mean, Miami ended up going toe to toe and almost winning the national title. And A&M was knocking on the end zone door
True.
there in the final second. So it wasn't as though it just folded in the playoffs. Uh, it played Miami really even and ended up losing. So uh, I know A&M's history though is very troubling. It's just you just anytime you expect something of A&M, anytime I predict A&M, I probably predict them too highly, and they invariably falter and fall below that level. Though last year for them to make the playoffs and do what they did, I thought that was fine. I didn't look at them as a national championship team.
No, I think that's right. Even though I'm belittling, I guess their 11-2 record. I think given where the program was coming into the season and given what they achieved, I thought that was appropriate. And so, well, maybe not, maybe more than appropriate. Quite frankly, I think it should have and was a celebrated season in A&M. I guess my question is whether that portends another playoff run this upcoming season. I'm a little bit more skeptical of that. How about underrated, John? Do you have somebody maybe that is in this top 25 from the SEC that you think should be higher, or maybe someone who wasn't even ranked in the top 25 that you would be tempted to put in there?
I think LSU is the main one. It was
You'd have them
ranked.
higher. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think LSU could be a playoff team. I look at Lane Kiffin's track record. He's got so much offense to work with. He's got running backs. This is a stronger running back core than LSU's had at any time during the Brian Kelly era. This LSU is solid running guys, a good, really good 1-2 punch now. It's got the receivers. Lane Kiffin signed 9 receivers in the portal. There's a lot of talent in that receiving core, and he proved at Ole Miss he can really utilize a deep receiving core. Uh, Combine that with adding Jordan Seaton, a much sought after offensive tackle from Colorado. Yeah, LSU overpaid for him, but the fact that LSU can overpay to me is significant. It's as though it's got an unlimited supply there. It just yeah, gets in there in the vault and takes out some cash, and there you go. So Kiffin also has helped a defense, made it better. I don't know if it'll have the overall talent that it had last year, but it's really solid. It's got a great 1-2 punch at linebacker, added a good pass rusher. So yeah, I think LSU is underrated.
How much do you trust the offensive line? I know they added transfers there as well. Obviously, they've added transfers everywhere. Do you trust it though? Because that's my question about LSU. I think they're going to be a top 25 team, but if they're better than number 15, where they're slotted in these rankings, to me, a lot of that is going to hinge on how good is that O line.
Yeah, the offensive line. I don't see how the offensive line could be worse by adding
Well, yeah.
Jordan Seaton. Okay, it should be better, but also I think it's offense. It's offense. It's running backs and it's quarterback. And Sam Levitt from Arizona State is a running quarterback. We always talk about your running backs, quarterback are dependent on an offensive line. Well, I think when you've got really good players at those skill positions, the offensive line can look better. You don't have to hold your blocks as long. I think Harlem Berry will be a star for LSU at running back. He's just getting started. So, that's the only question. And I should have looked at that more last preseason. I thought the line would be okay. They had a really proven. You had guys drafted over the previous offensive line from the 24 team, and so I'm thinking, well, the guys behind them, well, the only reason they aren't playing is because they got NFL guys ahead of them. That theory didn't stand the test of time at all.
Yeah, you mentioned Jordan Seaton, an offensive tackle, highly, highly ranked transfer. Of course, he comes from Colorado in Deion Sanders' program. So the offensive line as a whole, I'm curious to see how good it is. But that individual pickup was monstrous, no pun intended. This is a very
Yeah.
large bookend tackle to that line. So just right there, that is the makings of a better offensive line than what it was this past year. Of course, it would be hard to be much worse. As I'm looking for potential underrated teams, sleepers, John, are you moved by either Kentucky or Auburn? I know how much you are intrigued by teams that bring in big, highly ranked transfer classes, and we spoke on the podcast last week about how Kentucky. We don't know if we're going all in on Kentucky, but it is notable that they've signed a top 10 transfer class, including the highly regarded former Notre Dame backup Kenny Minchey. This isn't just any backup; he was pretty highly thought of there at Notre Dame, the quarterback coming in at Kentucky, and then Auburn with new coach Alex Golish. He brings in several of his players from South Florida, including his quarterback Byron Brown, along with several other Bulls. Neither one of those teams, Kentucky or Auburn, despite making a lot of noise in the transfer portal, is ranked in this too early top 25. Do you think that's appropriate? Would you be tempted by either of those teams?
No. With Auburn, Auburn reminds us that the transfer portal, it's two-way traffic.
Mm-hmm.
If Auburn could have kept Cam Coleman at wide receiver,
great point.
some other players, it lost a lot in the portal.
Yeah, so it lost as many bodies as it gained. That's a great point, John. That's one thing that's not always touched on, and we maybe are guilty of this as well. We talk about where teams rank in the portal rankings. That's just in terms of guys coming in. There is no ranking of which teams lost the most talent in the portal. Maybe there should be, and it's very fair ground, I think, for you to point that out. That yes, Auburn brought in a lot of guys. They also lost a lot of guys, including some talented guys like Cam Coleman.
I do think with Auburn, I don't know if any team upgraded itself as much at quarterback as Auburn did. Byron Brown accounted for 42 touchdowns last year at South Florida. Yeah, there were better quarterbacks, but you look at what he did, and he's in the same system now with Alex Golish. So there's no problem with transition. He's running the same offense he always ran in college. But you look at how bad Auburn's quarterbacking has been. I mean, it started 3 different quarterbacks last year. Jackson Arnold, where's he off to? He was one of my guys way back when.
He was one of your guys. I don't. He's off to his first stop now. I don't. I know. I've lost track of where Jackson Arnold is off to.
I no longer follow him.
He's officially off your. He's at UNLV. He's going to unite with Dan Mullen. Yes.
Maybe Dan Mullen will do something with him.
Mm-hmm.
Good luck.
Good luck.
And with Kentucky, yeah, I was so impressed with what Kentucky did. 2 things. It showed me it's got more NIL money than I thought. The combination of firing Mark Stoops and paying a $38 million buyout, coupled with getting one of the best transfer offensive line classes, maybe the best in the country. Mm-hmm. That told me Kentucky's got some money I didn't know it had. That money's supposed to go to basketball, I thought. So
according to Mark Stoops' pocket for a buyout.
Yeah, that was really significant, but it's still Kentucky, and it's got a long way to go. It's got so far to go after the last 2 seasons. And I'm always a little skeptical. Speaking of a transfer quarterback, Kenny Minchey, promising backups. I think.
Yeah, I know. I oversold that, didn't I? I made this guy out to be the next Heisman winner. But there is a difference between like some scrub backup you've never heard of. And, there was a lot of buzz around him at Notre Dame. Whether it's worth anything or not, I guess we'll find out this year. But you're right. I probably oversold that a little bit.
What's Kentucky's recent track record?
Well, that's just it. Maybe that's why I'm moved.
Transfer quarterbacks.
Yeah, maybe I'm moved by Kenny Minchey because I know all the quarterbacks Kentucky brought in from yesteryear, quarterbacks with there were really no buzz around. I mean, who was the guy they brought in last year? Zach Calzada, who was like on his 19th
a
season.
7-year guy from Incarnate Word who couldn't play for Auburn or Texas. He beat Alabama once at A&M. Talk about a career going the wrong way. Zach Calzada. He beat his first year as a starter with the Aggies. He beat Alabama, a good Alabama team, and after that, it was just right downhill.
Right downhill. Yeah, so I think maybe that's part of my enthusiasm for Kenny Minchie is knowing what came before him
Sure.
in the transfer portal for Kentucky. At least this one you can put a little spin on. Some of those guys, there was no positivity, no spin. You knew what was coming around the corner. Okay, John, let's get to one of the big stories over the weekend. Dabo named names. You know, we've heard coaches for years grumble about tampering, and they'll always say, "Oh, all these coaches, I see them out there. They're
Yeah.
texting my guys." Well, name
Uh-huh.
names. Name names. Dabo, he named names. We'll see if anything comes from this. But Dabo Swinney said, "quote If you tamper with my players, I'm going to turn you in." And he says he has turned in new Ole Miss coach Pete Golding for what Dabo says was a clear case of tampering. Now, who does this involve? This involves linebacker Luke Farrelly, who is a transfer to Clemson initially from Cal. This linebacker, Luke Farrelly, had a really good freshman season at Cal. He initially transfers to Clemson, and in Dabo's version of the story, he was at Clemson. He was enrolled at Clemson. And then he starts hearing from Ole Miss general manager Austin Thomas and Ole Miss coach Pete Golding, according to Dabo Swinney. Anyway, and Ole Miss came in with their offer of their own after Farrelly was already transferred and enrolled at Clemson. And Luke Farrelly popped back into the transfer portal at the 11th hour. And now he's at Ole Miss, and Dabo, well, he's had about enough of that. He is blowing the whistle and calling out Ole Miss and Pete Golding for tampering. John, what say you on all this?
Oh, I applaud Dabo Swinney because, as you said, most coaches, when they say that, they imply that the great wide world of college football, all those coaches out there are tampering, but they're towing the line and they follow the rule book.
And normally they never call anybody out specifically.
No, that's the difference. I mean, Danny White, Tennessee's athletic director, called out unnamed programs that aren't going by the letter of the law in the transfer portal. They're making NIL promises without clearing them through the clearinghouse. And seriously, how can you take that clearinghouse seriously? You can't tell somebody how much money he can make. So that ends up in court and you lose. What Dabo's talking about tampering, everybody's doing that. And I can't imagine the NCAA doing anything about it. It would have to start arresting everybody because when you look at what happens in the portal now, and it's constant. Well, look what Texas did. Alabama gets a commitment from NC State running back Hollywood Smothers, and then Alabama said, "You know what? He might be good enough to play running back for us."
I think the difference here is I don't think Smothers was ever enrolled at Alabama, right? This is a case of a guy who was enrolled
You're right.
at
Yes.
Clemson.
Yeah, that's different. Yeah, that is a little
So
different.
it's like Ole Miss here. If the allegations are true, which we don't know if they are, but I mean, Dabo was coming out guns blazing. Makes you think he's got something. He's saying they were coming after a guy that was enrolled in the spring semester, and they were like, "Hey, you can unenroll there and still enroll here," and he did.
Well, again, we just get back. I just everybody talks about the lack of guardrails. It's not just the lack of them; it's the lack of enforcement. What's being enforced? That's why, while I applaud Dabo for naming names and saying those guys are cheating and we're not, what are you going to do about it? I think, unfortunately for Dabo, the answer could be from the NCAA. Well, we'll look into it and make some calls.
We'll get back to you on that.
Get back to you.
That's like when your boss tells you, I'm gonna make this a top priority. I'll get right back to you on this. and then you never hear from your boss again on that one.
Yeah, and if you bring it up, it's always, "Oh, yeah, I'm working on it.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Working
Y
on it."
Yeah,
Yeah.
you told that about 3 times, and then you just stop
Then you
asking.
just leave it
Yeah,
alone.
I don't blame Dabo here for being upset. I don't blame him for blowing the whistle. And in fact, as you say, I respect it that at least he named names. I've had enough of this nonsense of everybody's cheating but me. But then you come with no receipts. You have no evidence that anybody else is cheating. You're just arguing against the nebulous evil person out there. No, this time Dabo, a coach, actually came with receipts. So I'll give him credit for that, and I do sympathize with him some. On the other hand, if I'm an Ole Miss fan, I don't know. I kind of like this. Our new coach is saying, "Hey, you're on such and such roster, and I want you. I'll just come with a better deal. And if it takes tampering, they ain't gonna do anything to me anyway. What's NCAA enforcement nowadays? They got no teeth. Come get me if they can find me." Right.
I
And so if I'm an Ole Miss fan, I think I kind of like this from Pete Golding, even though it might come off and might well be cheating. That tells me he's going to live in the gray a little bit, which is kind of how it has to be done if we're being quite honest in 2026 in college football. And it also might speak to why Clemson, their transfer class is ranked number 72 in the country. If a guy you really wanted and was enrolled in your school, if somebody can come in at the 11th hour and outbid you for him and steal him away, it tells me Clemson's not got a lot going on in the transfer world. And part of that might be Dabo's philosophy. He's not real big on taking transfers. We know this. He's made no bones about that. Part of it also might be, I mean, we're seeing this unfold right here in this instance. Clemson got outbid for a player, and this might be a microcosm of Clemson's reality and why they don't really make any noise in the transfer place is when they do find a player they want, they get outbid.
Sadly for Clemson, they're not going to make any noise in the transfer portal unless they hit it in the playoffs, rather, unless they hit it big in the transfer portal. There's just, to me, no way around that. And I think the irony with Ole Miss is that you lose Lane Kiffin. I mean, he's talk about living in the gray. He's the great gray man. And Lane Kiffin, and so they lose Lane Kiffin in a very high profile job change. But then they find out, yeah, their coach, he kind of subscribes to the same philosophy. You just do what you can and worry about the rules and then the punishment later. So it did have Hugh Freeze at one time. Remember that too. So I think that was heartening for Ole Miss. And I don't think Clemson fans are rallying around Dabo's comments saying, you get him, coach. You tell him. No.
Yeah, that's what's so tough about this. Again, I don't have any problem with what Dabo did. This is much better to me than just accusing the nebulous forces of cheating. He came with what he says is some evidence and he named names. That's all fine. But to your point, I don't see this as some great rallying cry from Clemson of, yes, we're gonna do it our way. We're gonna do it above board and be clean and be following the rules. Well, that's great. Your transfer class stinks. You didn't sniff the playoffs last year. Your team was a giant bust. Your quarterback was a bust. You haven't been relevant nationally in several years now. So that's great. Your coach blew the whistle. Maybe he should have. But at the end of the day, what do you got? You don't have much, certainly not in your transfer class. And you certainly have a lot less than what Ole Miss has in its transfer class. So maybe there's something to that gray USA. Maybe it's a fine place to be living in. And Clemson, their unfortunate reality is they might need to look into it a little bit more.
Yeah. I hear from unreliable sources that the NCAA is going to toughen up. I'll believe it when I see it.
Mm-hmm.
And here's something, Blake, I wonder about. You talk about what was significant about the Ole Miss Clemson debacle was that he was already enrolled at Clemson. What I really wonder, we only have one transfer portal window, a couple of weeks in January, where you can enter the portal. But what about at the end of the spring semester? And a player says, I'm out of here. Man, I'm going to play for the Longhorns. He takes his case to court. Do you think he'll lose? I don't.
I don't either. There's a young man who's playing basketball at Alabama right now who was just in the G League, the NBA's G League for the past 3 years, who might tell you how court works. So no, if it comes down to the NCAA versus anybody in court, I'm picking whoever they're going up against to win, and the NCAA being a loser. But nothing but winning here. John and I will be with you each and every week throughout the offseason. Hope you'll stick with us. We'll have much more to discuss on the transfer front, perhaps even a little bit more on the tampering front. That's a topic that never goes away, and certainly much more on the too early rankings front. And in fact, little teaser, maybe John and I can even get to work on our too early playoff predictions. Might have to roll that out soon. John, you got to work on your too early playoff predictions yet, or is that a little homework assignment for you?
That's a homework assignment. Yeah.
All right. Fair enough. Until then, thanks for listening to this edition of SEC Football Unfiltered.